Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about the Twilight Zone from the 1980s. This is Season 1, Episode 8. There's 3 stories in this episode and they are called Act Break, The Burning Man, and Dealer's Choice. So spoilers as always, and this is a Patreon sponsored review, so thank you very much to Cindy for picking this show. So yeah, we're back to 3 stories, and the breakup of the episode's a little bit different, I think, from what we've had previously, in that I would say it's 2 shorter stories, and then one that's like 20 minutes, which isn't that long, all things considered, but it's long in the scheme of like there being 45 minutes overall, and one story gets 20 minutes. But which is fine. It's more even, I suppose, than arguably it's ever been. And it's a mixed bag, this episode. There's kind of an amusing episode to start. There's one in the middle, which I don't really think I understood all that well. And then the final story is kind of just a sort of fun, playful one. It's not the most... Like, it doesn't really hold up too much logic in terms of how quickly the characters start believing the situation they're in. But it's mostly kind of entertaining, mainly just because of the actors and just kind of the more playful nature it has, as opposed to try to take itself super seriously as a story about the devil. But we'll get to that one. We start off with Act Break, which is about a playwright who's struggling to pay rent. He's getting chastised by his landlord, who's also a fish salesman or something. Interesting combination of trades there, I guess. But he's working on a play, he's struggling, but he's got a writing partner, and it sounds like they never have much luck. They don't make any money. They seem to be debating whether or not they should kill a character in a scene a number of different ways. Like, maybe the guy should kill the woman with a gun. No, not a gun. And they debate if there should be a gun. Should he push her out the window? Should he poison her? Should he do this, do that? Eventually, they sort of settle maybe on strangulation, but there's a lot of like fighting in between. And they're very animated. I think the big thing with this story is just how kind of big the characters are. They're very full of personality and very hopeful despite the fact that they're ignoring all of the real world problems that are coming down around them. I didn't know where this was going for most of the episode, or most of the story, I should say. Mainly just because I was interested. I was curious as to see like where this was going to go and what the Twilight Zone element was going to be. Like, what was going to be the supernatural thing? I will say it falls apart a little bit in that where it goes at the end is kind of just like a big wild swing that's just kind of a bit gimmicky. But more importantly, I feel like the Twilight Zone element, in this case a supernatural like stone that grants a wish, just comes out of nowhere. Like, there is nothing in the story that is remotely about anything like that. It's never hinted at. I didn't notice any hints. And then all of a sudden, the writing partner has a heart attack. And it's played for laughs. It's a fun moment because he's kind of like acting out the scene as the other guy writes, and he's sort of like getting more intense, but he keeps sort of clutching his chest and eventually collapses. And you realize, oh no, this wasn't just him acting, this was him actually having a heart attack. And he just whips out this like necklace with a stone at the end of it and says, hey, you'll get one wish with this. Use it to bring me back. And all we get from like the main character is like, wait, that story you told about when you were in the war was true? And that's it. Like, like he has a magic stone from when he crashed a plane or something in a war. I don't know what war. Vietnam, maybe? I don't know. It's very, very just abrupt. It just comes out of nowhere and you're like, oh, that's what this is. And then it didn't really bother me though, because then the comedy then came from the main character debating with himself after his partner has died. He's like, well, this is only one wish. You're supposed to get 3 with these things, but this thing only grants you 1 wish. So he starts debating with himself whether or not he wants to waste the wish on bringing his partner back to life, or if he wants to use it for himself to get success in some way. And honestly, watching him debate this is quite entertaining. The actors does quite a good job of like, it's very like pantomime. It's funny that they're playwrights because I very much imagine this type of performance as being like someone on stage like weighing the options backwards and forwards in a funny way so that the audience can react between each kind of like, you know, 180 that he pulls in his logic. as he tries to convince himself that maybe it's okay if I just get selfish here and do it for myself. And they even have a comedy beat where his friend turns out to not be dead yet and says, "What are you waiting so long for?" and then dies right after. It's pure comedy. It's purely a funny story, and because of that, I suppose I can't really complain too much about the magic thing coming out of nowhere. My bigger problem is that when he makes his wish, it's not that he wishes for success or that he wishes for lots of money so he can just do his writing in peace without having to worry about everything else. He instead wishes to have the best playwright be his writing partner. He says, I want a new writing partner. I want it to be the best playwright that's ever lived. So the last few minutes of this story are him time traveling to olden times in the bedroom of William Shakespeare, where Shakespeare thinks he's a servant, and then when he starts talking about plays and stuff and bringing stuff up and proves that he can read, which surprises Shakespeare, he mentions Hamlet, to which Shakespeare goes, "What is this, Hamlet? What do you speak of?" So it ends up being like a sort of a Chuck Berry from Back to the Future time loop thing, where Shakespeare's only going to write Hamlet because he forces this guy from the future to write it for him, but he only knows it because he remembers it from performing it in college or writing classes or whatever. And Shakespeare's going to make him do all the work and give him none of the credit. And then that's your sort of loop, right? And honestly, this ending just kind of caught me so off guard. As soon as he transported in time and he was in different clothes and he was looking around, he gets a bit annoyed because this isn't exactly what he asked for, even though technically it is. I just kind of feel oh wait, we're doing this goofy time travel thing where he's in a costume now. I don't know. It just all of the comedy for me came from the characters and just their kind of troubles of working together. And will he betray him and not use the wish for him? That was where the comedy was coming from for me. All that stuff where he gets to interact with Shakespeare, who by the way is played by the same actor as his writing partner who died. At least I think he was. It looked the same guy with the wig and the facial hair and whatnot. So yeah, it kind of had a weird ending for me, but it doesn't hurt it that much because it's just generally fairly enjoyable, and because it is so lighthearted, it's not I was mad that I didn't get a good meaningful ending or anything like that. I was just kind of okay, that was amusing. Didn't necessarily love where it went, but it's not, it's definitely there's more torturous stories that one could sit through on a Twilight Zone episode, so I won't complain too much, but there's definitely things to like though. I do think the characters are at least somewhat entertaining, at least for a bit, so take that as you will. The middle story, The Burning Man, is a completely different thing, right? It's this super cryptic story to me. It's based on a Ray Bradbury short story, which I assumed, when I saw that name at the start, I thought, oh, this is probably going to be good. That was the thought I had. And notably, one of the characters here is played by Piper Laurie from Carrie. She was Carrie's mum in that movie. We also have an actor who I don't know the name of, but he was the shoveler from Home Alone. It's that old man from Home Alone that shovels the snow, and they spread rumors about how he killed people with his shovel or something. So he's in here. And this is about an auntie and her nephew who are driving out to the lake on a summer day, really hot day, to spend the day together, and the kid's all excited, she's happy, blah, blah, blah. And they get flanked down by this man, played by the shoveler, who waves them down, hoping for a ride, and he's like, oh, you stopped? And they're like, yeah. And they talk about how it's record temperatures and all that, it's the hottest summer in 20 years, blah, 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 blah. And from there, this episode is just this old man talking about stuff. It's just I'm sure there's something here. I'm sure there's something I'm not quite getting here. But he rambles on about it being super hot. He rambles on about how there's evil beneath the surface, and I was like, oh, is he like the devil? Turns out we've actually got a devil in the next story, but that was what was going through my head in the moment. And he's talking about how evil can rise up and swallow things whole. And then the big running thing that he really gets into is this idea of genetic evil. This idea that some people are just born and are instantly evil from the day they're born, and that will never change. They're just evil. They're evil beings. and how that if they wake up on a really hot day like this, which is what brings them out, they will consume everything. They'll consume the fields, they'll consume the trees, they'll consume everything. And I'm like, okay. So eventually, though, he keeps getting really, like, it doesn't really get more animated, but he gets more and more extreme in what he's saying. That eventually the auntie's like, you know what? I don't want my nephew hearing this crazy stuff. This is like nonsense. This is all conspiracy theory stuff at best. So she stops the car, insists he gets out, and claims that she has like a gun with silver bullets and crucifixes and stuff in the car, which scares him off. And they drive on, and she was lying about all that, and she even admits that to her nephew, who's like, hey, you were kind of badass. I mean, that's not the word he uses, but that's effectively why he's impressed. He's like, oh, you were kind of badass. I've never heard you talk like that before. So he's all excited. They go have a nice day in the lake. And then the end of the story is when they're driving back through this road, they encounter a young boy who claims he was left behind by his family on a picnic. So she's like, hey, hop in, I'll give you a lift. Now, this young boy is wearing a very sharp, very, very smart white suit, like a three-piece suit. Very dapper. So instantly, he's clearly evil, right? No child would be wearing this unless they're evil. But notably, the old man from before was wearing kind of a white suit as well, but it was beat up, it was ripped, it would clearly... So it really gave this impression that the old man had been reborn into this kid, and he was a being of evil. And the end is very sudden, and it's got a little bit of a creepy factor to it, but I didn't understand enough of this story to really get that much out of the ending, even though I understood that it was dangerous. Where basically the kid leans over and whispers something into the auntie's ear, which scares the shit out of her, and the car like stops just right then and there. And then the kid just says, the stranger kid that is, just says, have you ever considered the idea that genetic evil exists? And they just kind of look at each other, and the camera like pulls out and it cuts to black, more or less. That's how it ends. So it ends in this really ominous note that like these two encountered a being of evil, and I don't know, they were destined to be consumed by it by the end of the day. I honestly, like, most of this story was the old man rambling a bunch of nonsense that didn't really make that much sense to me. I just didn't get what he was saying. It probably didn't help that the audio quality, because these haven't been remastered in HD or anything like that. Like, the audio quality on them was not the best, so I don't even think I was like getting all of his sentences, to be honest. But regardless, it left me just feeling a little bit confuddled. I wonder if the short story that's all in prose, I imagine that probably does a better job of like getting the point across that it's trying to make. Whatever the symbolism is of this old man turning into the kid, I don't know. But it just left me feeling quite cold, if I'm honest. I just kind of like had this sort of like confused look in my face. I was like, oh, what was that? At the end, I didn't get much out of it. Luckily, the third story, I think, is a bit of fun. It's not the best story ever, but we do have a younger Morgan Freeman, because he was never young. I refuse to believe he was ever young. But he is here. This is pre... You know, I mean, I know... The first thing I know him from Shawshank, which is not even until 94, but Driving Miss Daisy, which I think was his first, like, known role, was a bit after this, I want to say. But he's here. We also have Carla's husband from Cheers. Let me go get his name, because I've actually seen him pop up in a bunch of things recently. He's been in... he's in Blood Simple, with, whatchamacallit? The Coen Brothers movie. In fact, actually, so is Emmett Walsh, who's also in this short story, which I hadn't mentioned yet. Dan Hedaya, that's the actor's name I was looking for. So, yeah, it's a poker game, right? As if the title didn't give you the hint. It's a poker game, and they're just casually chatting. You get kind of a sense of the personalities of the various people around the table. You know, there's the three I mentioned. There's also another two characters there. Jake, and then Marty. And Marty's kind of like the goofball one. I think what I appreciated about this story, which effectively boils down to they realize that Nick, played by Dan Hedaya, is the devil, because he keeps getting 3 6s in every single hand that he gets. They jump to that conclusion spectacularly quick, but it kind of works in a weird way, because it does kind of feel like a bunch of middle-aged fools just trying to entertain themselves and getting themselves riled up. And sometimes some of the best Twilight Zone episodes are the ones where characters just get themselves riled up for no good reason, just because they get paranoid. So it kind of worked in that sense, but I think it's got a bit of a personality and a sense of humor. Something as simple as the character of Marty leaves the table to go to the bathroom a bit into the story. And while he's gone, that's when the others have the conversation about the Sixies and come to this conclusion that this is probably the devil and that he's probably there because one of them's going to die, that he's there to collect a soul from one of them. They get worried about which one of them it could be. And he comes back out, and it doesn't take that long before they just accuse him of it, and sort of he kind of opens up and gets into it. But all of this plays out while Marty's in the bathroom, and I was starting to actively notice that Marty's not here. Like, what the hell? Like, how long is he going to be gone? And they get to this whole point in the story where they actually bargain with the devil and say, why don't we make it a game? Why don't we play a hand between devil and what turns out to be Peter, M.M. Walsh's character, who's the one who's going to be taken. He's like, hey, I'll play you one-on-one, and if I win, I get to keep my soul and stay alive. And the devil's like, all right, and you know, I'll also, you're putting in your soul into the pot, I'll put in $18, and then they haggle him up to $19 because 18's 3 times 6, which they're not happy about. So he's playing his soul against $19, which is pretty funny. Yeah, like this game they play for his soul is like commenced. They're like, I don't know if they're halfway through it necessarily, but they've already started. When Marty finally comes back from the bathroom, he sits down and goes, oh, what's going on then? And one of the other characters just says, oh, Nick's the devil and he's here to take Peter's soul, but they're playing around to see if he can still take it. They're playing lowball. And in the way that Marty just kind of like goes, oh, okay. Like legitimately made me laugh. Like he just rolls with it. He doesn't give a shit. I don't know. Like that I think that like sort of, if I wasn't already feeling it by that point, I definitely got the sense of humor that this maybe had, or the sense of playfulness that it at least had. Yeah, so I've never heard of lowball poker before, but it's basically the idea that instead of the best hand winning, the worst hand wins. And he picks this as the game because the devil keeps getting at least 3 sixes. That means that it shouldn't be too hard to get less than 3 of a kind and come out on top. Of course, it gets very tense when he gets 3 5s, and then because that's less than 6, he'll still win in low ball rules, but then he pulls out a 4th 5, and it's like, shit. But then there's still the mystery card that the devil's not turned over, and that could be a 6, meaning that he's got 4 sixes, and 4 sixes would be higher than 4 5s, and therefore Peter would win and get to keep his soul. But when he turns it over, it's a death card, and it's only because Marty touches it after the fact that the illusion that's making it look a death card goes away and it turns into a 6. And they find out it was always 6s, and that Peter had won the game, and the devil just kind of goes, well, I am the devil. You can't blame me for trying. Here, I'll make it up to you. He snaps his fingers, says goodbye, and says, oh, next time I'll host. Which is very ominous coming from the devil. I enjoyed this. This was a Wes Craven directed story, by the way. I didn't mention that. And it's just got like a playful sense of humor to it. It just, the characters sort of treat like what's going on with this level of just kind of like, it's almost like a skit. But the point of the skit's not to be funny. I mean, there is some humor in it, but it's not like a parody skit. It's like a skit that's just there to sort of have fun with the simple ideas of what if the devil came to the guy's poker game and he was going to take one of their souls and they tried to haggle him into a game to play for their soul. That's it. That's the premise. And it's kind of a fun one. I think the characters are likable enough and are entertaining enough as they're, even the devil himself, like Dan Hedaya as he's playing, and the way he just kind of like chuckles to himself or whatever. He doesn't ham it up and like start chewing scenery, or it's not like once they know he's that he suddenly turns into a big red monster or starts talking with a, like, yes, I am the devil and I've come to take you. Like, there's none of that. He just kind of still acts like he did. I was like, oh, you got me. Yeah, you're right. I'm the devil. Yeah, I'm here for one of you. It's like a day at the office for him, and it gives it this just kind of low key kind of tone that I think makes it a fun watch. It definitely doesn't measure up to some of my favorite stories that we've had so far in this version of the Twilight Zone, but I definitely like, versus some of the ones that I don't like that much, I definitely think this is like a good time over them. This, I like this the most out of these three stories by far, I think. So anyway, the ending, it turns out that when he snapped his fingers to apologize for trying to trick them, he basically magically made a feast appear in the kitchen. So they get into the kitchen to get something, and they have like a whole feast. The fridge is full of beer, and they were complaining about being out of beer like 20 minutes ago, and they just continue their poker game. They're just happy to keep on going. Like, they had a close call with the devil, and it's not phased them. Back to the poker. And Morgan Freeman's pissed because they want to go back to 5-card stud, and he was wanting to switch it up, play just a slightly different version of poker, just to spice it up a little bit. And they're all just set in their ways and fuddy-duddies, and that's it. It's alright. This is a fun time. I enjoyed the last story well enough. So, there you go. That's pretty much the episode there. It's, I think this was an interesting mix. It definitely leaned more towards playful stories, because the first one was an outright comedy story, and then the last one had a very playful sense of humor to it. The middle story being the obvious exception, and that's maybe why they kind of like put this, like, maybe when they were like getting all these stories made, I don't know if they already assigned like which episodes they go to, if that's something they maybe finessed after the fact and said, oh, maybe we'll put this really depressing dark one with these other like cheery ones so that they kind of balance each other out. And maybe that's why this one is the way it is. But I mean, overall, it's not a bad episode, but it's definitely far from the best as well. But it's not as bad as like that one we had. Was it last time with the whole the watch thing, the 1 hour to midnight story? Yeah, like much better than that one for sure. So hey, that's my thoughts on this episode of the 80s Twilight Zone. I'll be back in a couple of weeks with the next installment. So let me know what you thought of this in the comments below. Remember, all these segments you can watch on YouTube. You can go find them for yourself if you want to give them a watch as well, and let me know what you think of them in the comments. It's always nice to hear other opinions. You can support everything over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and get some bonuses for your trouble, or you can do YouTube membership if that's more your thing. But if you do Patreon, you also get all the bonuses for the Mail Fuzz Movies YouTube channel, which is where we do all the movie podcasts, and that's got a lot of bonus content that comes with it. So go check out the Mail Fuzz Movies channel. But regardless, that is me. Thank you very much for joining. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV in the Twilight Zone.